Hi everyone, I'm Asma, and I'm happy to welcome you to the PwC Workforce podcast series on wage withholding tax incentives. This podcast is part of a series tackling key issues organizations are facing today on their most important asset, their workforce. Today, we will focus on the wage withholding tax incentives, and the message is clear. Audits are coming, so be prepared rather than be in a waiting position, and let's take a proactive look at this. Two of my colleagues, Thomas and Dries, who are specialized in employment taxes, will provide you with more insights on this topic. In addition, I will also have the pleasure to be joined today by Lotte van Steen from Cronos Groep tax team. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you very much for the invite.
You're welcome, Lotte. Before deep diving into the topic of today, I believe it is important to learn a bit more about your company, Lotte. Could you expand a bit on this?
Yes, of course. We are a group of Belgian companies specialized in IT. All of our companies have their own IT specialization. We consider ourselves as one of the front runners in IT. To make sure we keep our position as a front runner, the Cronos Groep searches for new opportunities in IT all over the world on a daily basis. We introduce, develop, and use the newest and most innovative technologies. Due to the IT revolutions in all aspects of our lives, investing in R&D isn't only important, but it's also a necessity.
Clear. Thanks a lot. The topic of today is about the R&D wage withholding tax incentive and how to tackle the wave of audits coming on this. I believe PwC has been assisting you with both tackling some of these audits and preparing for audits to come. Now, let's deep dive into the topic. And first, I would like to start with a very general question for you, Thomas. We are talking about wage withholding tax incentive, but could you maybe clarify a bit more? What is the incentive?
Yeah, definitely. Basically, the entire full name, which is quite a mouthful, is the partial exemption of remittance of wage withholding taxes for research and development, which is, as I said, quite a mouthful. But what does it mean exactly? Basically, it's a payroll incentive. It's a tax incentive, but it's through the payroll of companies. That gives you an incentive if you employ people on a Belgian payroll that are performing R&D activities. So I think it's important to mention there has been a study on this by the Federal Plan Bureau, which concluded that this incentive actually works. So the goal is, of course, to enable companies to hire more R&D staff, to do more R&D activities, consequently in Belgium. And there has been a study. Okay, this tax incentive, payroll incentive, it actually works. But of course, there are conditions related to that tax incentive. And we'll come back to most of them later on in the podcast, but allow me to briefly summarize before kicking off. So the first one is, I'll call it a formality, but as we'll say a bit later on, it's not a formality, it's a necessity. That is a notification at BELSPO. And BELSPO is actually the federal agency for scientific affairs in Belgium. They are entitled to assess R&D activities in Belgium. You have to be notified. So first of all, on the BELSPO portal, so on the website, you have to notify your company as, okay, I'm doing R&D activities, a very important one, because if you don't do that, you cannot apply the incentive before the date you apply at the website. So that's the first one, the BELSPO condition. The second one is the employees you're requesting the incentive for need to have a qualifying degree. So they need, and this is the general rule for most companies, they need at least they need one of the three. They need a PhD, a master's, or since 2018, a bachelor's degree also qualifies, but not just any degree. It needs to be in exact sciences. So, for example, civil engineering, industrial engineering, mathematics, degrees like that. But on the other hand, degrees like commercial sciences or economics in essence, or psychology, they don't qualify. So it needs to be an exact science study area. And third condition, of course, speaks for itself, but still a very important one. There need to be actual R&D activities performed, and you can only apply it for the time people actually spend on R&D activities. So I hope this gives you some more insight on this.
Yes, thank you, Thomas. It is clear, I think, now for everyone. And I believe it is important to bear in mind that there are specific conditions, as you mentioned, to respect, but also formalities around the request for such incentive as well. Thank you, Thomas. Well, to come back now to the audit itself. Last year, lots of audits were performed on this specific topic, on the wage withholding tax incentives. And we see that this is not stopping, as this year we still see a lot. My feeling, but of course it is a perception which could be wrong, is that it appears clearly that the rules of the games are quite strict and formal. Am I wrong? Maybe Lotte, can you elaborate a bit on this?
Yeah, sure. We have had several audits concerning this tax incentive. In our opinion, most of these tax incentives were focused on the formal conditions. For example, the Belspro application. The burden of proof is very heavy and it differs with each tax inspector. Every tax inspector has their own way of performing an audit, and the outcome of these tax audits are very different with each tax inspector. In our experience, the formal conditions take precedence over the actual R&D conditions.
Okay. And Thomas or Dries, do you share the same experience?
Yeah, definitely. It has been quite some years, I must say, with a lot of tax audits and a lot of different outcomes, often depending on the tax inspector themselves. So completely agree with Lotte. And also, if I might add, there should be more consistency, in my opinion, in those tax audits. But often it really depends on the type of tax inspector, how the tax inspection goes. But indeed, share exactly the same experiences as Lotte.
Okay, clear. Thank you. I would say that it is important to be prepared then, but also to be advised properly and timely when it goes to such an audit. It is clearly not just simply presenting documents on a story. Could you maybe please provide us with some lessons learned from the previous audits?
Yes, of course, Asma. An audit usually refers to a previous income year than the current one. So, for example, in 2021, the application of the exemption for income year 2019 will be examined by the tax authorities. This, of course, has an important effect on the collection of the information. The first important remark on this relates to the requirement to have a degree in exact science, so a bachelor, master, or PhD degree. We often see during a tax audit that the degrees are not immediately available and still need to be collected from the employees. So it often happens that an employee has left the company, so no degree is available. And that's a problem because if no copy of the degree can be provided to the tax authorities, no exemption for that employee can be claimed. So this can lead to substantial corrections. Also related to the condition of the degrees, or the employees with a foreign degree. So for the foreign degrees, we must receive confirmation from Belspro. So Belspro need to say that the degree is equivalent to a Belgian degree, so that the master degree is the same as a master degree in Belgium. But we regularly see that they cannot be considered equivalent to a master's degree, and therefore, or a bachelor degree, or don't qualify for the measure. And that has an impact on the application of the exemption, of course. So that's very important. So therefore, it's important that the degrees are already available at the company, and therefore we propose to collect the degrees on the onboarding process for the new employees. In that case, we can submit the degrees to Belspro and verify whether the degree is equivalent to a Belgian degree and if the degree is eligible for the R&D exemption. Another important thing is that not all non-European degrees can be confirmed by BELSPO. And there's another institution, the NARIC, and they can give official recognition of the foreign degrees. But this procedure can take a lot of time and mostly between 3 or 6 months to have an answer from the NARIC. So therefore, it's really important that we receive the degrees when the employee starts their job at the company. Maybe a short story from our experience some time ago. For a company who had an audit, we need to collect 500 degrees in a period of a month of time. So that was very time consuming and challenging. And I think we have worked a couple of weeks full time to do the collection of the information. So it's very important that that's done before an audit occurs. Quite the same story for the R&D related information. So we need to show the tax authorities that R&D activities are carried out, and we also need to show the time spent from the employees on the R&D activities. So a simple way to demonstrate the time spent on R&D activities is the use of time registration. But this is not always sufficient for the tax authorities. So they ask more information and more supporting documents to show the involvement on the R&D activities, on the R&D projects from the R&D employees. It's also more difficult to collect this information afterwards during the tax audit and in advance. So, and the deadline is also very short, mostly a month. So therefore, we prefer to organize in Forens a workshop meeting with the R&D manager where we can analyze the time spent on the R&D projects. So there are two things that we do during the workshop meetings. So first of all, we look at the R&D projects, so we can see which projects refer to R&D and which projects do not refer to R&D. And the second part is to see which employees are involved on which R&D projects. So we can allocate the time of the employees on the R&D projects. And a third thing that we do is to see which information is available to sustain the claim and to prove that the R&D activities were spent on these projects. So, and based on this information, we make up a defense file. So in the defense file, all the information about the employees who all the information is mentioned of the employees who are eligible for the measure based on their degree, and also all the information of their time spent on R&D projects and the information about the R&D projects. So that's a very important document that can be used in case of a tax audit to show that the file is correct and everything is done correctly. Now Thomas will give some more information about the formalities in relation with the tax audits.
Yeah, indeed, because that was the first condition we talked about, the BELSPO formality. We kept using the word formality, but as I said, it's not only a formality, it's actually a necessity, because there have been some tax audits, and Lotte can attest to that, I can assure, where the tax inspector, although there was a clear file with all degrees available, the R&D projects were clearly demonstrated. There might have even been timesheets available, but there is a mentioning in the law about, okay, you have to notify at BELSPO. So as I said, you can only apply the incentive if you did the notification. There's no other way around it. You have to be notified on the BELSPO site. But even some companies that were notified, and a lot of them even went to BELSPO to have a meeting with them and to explain the activities and to receive a confirmation, okay, we are performing R&D activities, and then BELSPO calls it on a structural basis, and you get a recognition as a structural R&D program. So they did all of that, but there's also on the BELSPO portal a field you can complete with an end date of the program. But a lot of companies said, okay, end date, what do you mean with an end date? That there is no point in the future that we will stop doing R&D. We will try to exist and innovate as long as we live, so to speak. But still, there was some strict case law on this, interpreting the law very strict, which was then being applied by tax inspectors, saying, okay, if I can find out you didn't mention an end date in BELSPO, that's enough for me to refute the full exemption. and in some cases even up to 5 years back with interest. So you can imagine these are quite horrific scenarios whereby companies doing everything in good faith, actually performing R&D activities, are punished in a really bad way. So that is the very formalistic approach. And now even a bit more recent, a couple of weeks ago, there was a parliamentary question saying that, okay, and the end date then, if you put a hypothetical end date, what to do then? Is that okay or not? Let's say 2025, 2030, or the year 3000, basically, there is no end date. Then the minister said, okay, that's also not sufficient. There has to be a realistic end date. So in the meanwhile, together with Belspo, we have kind of a method to make sure those end dates are correct and that everything is done correctly on a formal level. But that's a really important one to know, that formalism is really very important, because a lot of tax inspectors look at it very strictly, and the consequences of having not complied with it can be really, really severe.
Okay, clear, Thomas. Um, I would remember, I think that formalities should not be seen as an administrative burden, but clearly as a necessity. Thank you. I'm still asking myself now on how to be prepared for 2019 and future. I mean, more on a practical perspective. Would you have any concrete advice here? Maybe we can start with you, Lotte.
Yes, thank you. As I already said earlier in this podcast, there is a very heavy burden of proof with this specific tax incentive. In our experience, it is very important to make sure every aspect of the case is linked very clearly in one document. It is important to present one clear file with all relevant puzzle pieces. For example, the employees, their timesheet codes, Frascati documentation, the project title, the project description, anything you can think of. To make sure we deliver a strong case, PwC gave us some very valuable tips and tricks. Before our collaboration with PwC, we delivered all these puzzle pieces separately and scattered, which made it harder for the tax inspector to make a good analysis of the R&D conditions of the tax incentive. If you can deliver one clear document with all the necessary links, the tax inspector can look at one file and see very clearly how all puzzle pieces fall together. This makes your case very strong.
Thank you, Lotte. Thomas, maybe something to add?
Yeah, indeed. I think everything Lotte has said, I completely agree with. And I think as a company, it's primarily important to be aware of this incentive, this subsidy, to call it like that, that it's applied for very easily. So basically through payroll, it's very easy to get this money. But it's not always that easy to demonstrate it in case of a tax audit. So that's really my advice to all companies. And that's something that the Cronos Group is doing really well now, and we're helping them with, is to be really aware of this incentive and know what documentation you have available, what can you use to demonstrate those R&D activities, and how can you make one strong file out of that. So that in case a tax inspector comes, you at least have a very clear picture, okay, who has done what in terms of R&D activities, how can we prove that, what do we have available. So that's really my conclusion of this case. Be aware and be prepared, basically.
Thank you. That's already the end of this podcast. I would like first to thank you, Lotte, for having accepted the invite and having shared your experience with us. Thank you also, Thomas and Dries, for sharing your insights. To briefly recap what has been said, I will remember the following. First, the R&D wage withholding tax incentive is a substantial cash for benefits. 2, conditions which are not always crystal clear need to be respected to benefit from this incentive, as well as some formalities. Let's call it like that. 3, very strict audits are going on as we speak, and collaboration with specialists in this field is key to prepare yourself appropriately. Thanks again, Lotte, Thomas, and Dries. Thanks everyone for listening. You can find all podcast episodes on our website or on the different platforms. Stay tuned for our next episode. Have a nice day.